This is the third part of the tutorial on how to work with tone paper with black and white drawing materials, black and white chalk. We've rendered out the pair. Now let's deal with our transparent surfaces. We've got the dark green glass here, we've got the glass colored, our transparent glass over here. Let's start off with the dark material first. Alright, so the question is, what do we do anytime we're looking at something that is relatively dark in value? The first thing we do is tone it down to the general local value that we're seeing. So I'm looking at the glass. There's some values that go really, really dark. There's some highlights. I'm going to ignore the highlights at the beginning. And I'm going to tone it down to the value right here where the glass is brightest. That's still really dark because the glass is really dark green. But let's do this. Let's go a little bit darker. And then the best way to smooth this out is to use either a chamois or a soft paper towel. So I'm going to use a chamois. That's probably the best way of doing it. However, the chamois will have a tendency to erase any detail that you put in the darker values. So here I have to be a little bit careful. I can switch to my paper towel though, and that'll give me very similar results, but leave my lines alone. So the chamois will destroy all the detail that I worked so hard to achieve. The paper towel won't. Though I suppose the chamois gives me slightly smoother results. So there's a trade-off there. Okay, let me take a look at this. You know what? I'm going to go a little bit darker. Why? Instinct. And really, I want the highlights on this thing to be really, really bright. The only way to do that is to make the surrounding glass really dark. So don't go all the way black. We're looking for some kind of average value that's right about here. But at this stage, it's a little bit of an estimate, a little bit of a guessing game. Towards the end, I might have to go a little bit lighter, a little bit darker. I'll definitely have to go darker overall. Okay, so now that we have the glass in a general dark value, now I can start going in and getting the darker parts. So once again, we're trying to break things down to simple steps. Ignore the highlights, ignore the lighter parts of the glass. Start going in and looking for only the darkest values. So I notice that this round bulb has a darker area right here. Where else? It's got some darker areas here. Like this. It's going darker here. Wherever the glass is thickest, it'll tend to go darker. So we have a dark area here. I'm assuming that's the back of the lip. Reflecting, refracting, getting distorted inside this bulb. This way. It is really, really dark here. Not quite pure black, but really dark. The sides of this thing, where the glass is wrapping around, will tend to go a little bit darker. This way, where else? Inside the neck, it'll go darker as well. Like this. Okay, so only look for the darker areas. Take your stump and blend them down. Everybody, charcoal works better when you're applying it in layers. So as opposed to trying to go dark right away, build up to it little by little. You'll find that this paper is easier to work with. It's easier to go darker. It's already a dark value. But because it's toothier, it has a better time holding on to the charcoal. You'll find that a lot less charcoal falls off. Yes, but still. Make sure that you build up little by little, because if I start pressing down really hard, and if I start using my stump very aggressively, I'm going to flatten out the paper fibers, and you'll find that the paper is very quickly so slick that it no longer grabs the material. I like to call that reaching the point of saturation, right? Where the paper has either so much material on it that it no longer grips and will start falling off, or it's so slick, it's been flattened out so much that it can no longer take the material. So build up little by little. Avoid the inclination, the tendency to press hard, to blend really aggressively. Let it build up little by little. Alright, so I'm not going to do this area. You'll see in the photo after this video how I treated the rest of this thing. But to save time, I'm just going to work on this area right here. There's really no shortcut for these reflections. I'm just drawing what I'm seeing. I'm looking at all the really interesting, intricate, convoluted shapes here. I don't know what to tell you. It's just work. It's not particularly difficult. It just it takes time and a little bit of patience. Okay, so let's smooth this out a little bit. And now we're going to start really gently erasing out. Where specifically? Anywhere where I see the glass is going a little bit lighter. So for instance, here. Let's start going a little bit lighter. Really nothing inside the glass is as bright as the paper tone, with the exception of certain highlights. This is very, very subtle stuff. There's a bunch of reflections going on. So for instance, if you look carefully, the pear is reflected twice. Once here, and look closely, there's one little reflection right here. Going this way. Alright, what else? A bunch of little reflection. The more detail you put in, the more reflective the object gets. Again, there are no shortcuts for you. I don't have any tricks. There are no tricks. Any trick will make your drawing worse. Alright, then I can also use my hard eraser to start erasing some of the duller highlights. For instance, perhaps this highlight where light is hitting the glass and reflecting through it and bouncing off here. It's kind of like a secondary highlight. Notice that my paper is so dark here that when I erase out, these highlights almost look bright enough. So we've got a few other reflections here going this way, like this. We've got this pear, weird and distorted on the neck, going this way, going like this. I can also clean up my drawing a little bit, though there's going to be some kind of background here. Alright, now for the fireworks. Let's put in some bright highlights. In this case, because we're putting white on top of this, erase out any area where you plan to put in a highlight. So there's a bright highlight here. We're going to create a little halo. Create a little halo. Create a little halo. Where else? A few other spots where we can put in a highlight. And now we can put in a really bright, really strong highlight. Hopefully you guys can see just how bright and shiny it is. And again, the reason why this works is because of the value next to it. Value is relative. I I can't make this look like it's glowing until I put the values around it. See how that works? These highlights probably need to have a little bit more pop too. What else? Again, don't forget to erase out all the charcoal underneath, otherwise you're never going to be able to go quite this bright. Okay. Pretty easy actually, right? You'd think that this would be more complicated, but glass effects are really a cinch using this technique. Now once again, I'm always working from the middle to extremes of light and dark, so really the last step might be to put in some sharp, dark accents. Don't blend these. Keep them crispy. Keep them sharp. It'll keep your drawing from losing strength. Right? Sometimes you'll find the drawings, when they're overblended, will look kind of washed out, dull, feeble, even if they're perfectly accurate. Okay, so let's break this demo again. In the next demo, we'll deal with the transparent glass. Okay, so I finished this up a little bit. It's not fully finished, but let's move on to the transparent glass. So this one I notice is ever so slightly darker than my general background values. So in this case, I'm not going to tone it, but I am going to tone it a little bit. Make it ever so slightly darker than the paper tone. A dirty chamois will be perfect for this purpose. So let's go just ever so slightly darker. Nothing is perfectly transparent, so usually the transparency is going to darken the values behind the object ever so slightly, or lighten them. So if we have a really dark background, maybe the first step would be to lighten the whole thing. Quite possibly. Potentially. Okay, now the next step is to go in and once again find your darker reflections. So we have some interesting stuff going on. We have a little bit of a darker edge here that kind of snakes along this way, then gets picked up here this way. Not certain, but I'm assuming that these are all reflections of the objects that we're seeing over here. And then some really interesting stuff going on here. So we have the shadow of this dark glass coming through this way, like this, running through this way. Look, me explaining what it is somewhat pointless. Just to say that I'm doing exactly what you guys are doing. I'm looking and recording what I see. There are no shortcuts. There's no trickery involved in drawing glass. I just have to draw what I see. And obviously be sensitive. Be sensitive to the value. Okay, so I notice it's going a little bit darker here. This is more me talking you through the drawing as opposed to actually giving you instruction. The most important thing to notice is that I'm being systematic. I'm doing one thing at a time. I'm planning ahead a little bit. Once again, and I keep repeating this, all art making is a process of breaking things down to simple steps, unless you're some kind of crazy abstract expressionist artist where the order is disorder. The order is deliberately not having any kind of priority in how you work. But I suspect if they did have priority, they'd get better work out of it. Maybe, I don't know. Can't speak for abstract expressionists. Okay, lots of stuff going on, and the more subtle I am about it, in fact, look at me drawing with a blending stump. If you have a dirty blending stump, you can do this. Don't try this with a clean blending stump, it won't work. And by the way, I can always soften this kind of stuff with my paper towel, my chamois. Alright, let's start erasing out a little bit. So, we're ignoring the highlights, which is always the case. Always ignore the highlights at the beginning, and start erasing out some of the mid-tony reflections. I know, mid-tony is not a word. Should be. Anytime you have a soft reflection, use your kneaded eraser. We've got some harder reflections in there. Some streaks. Stuff like that. Again, be careful not to make the reflections too bright. Really, I'm trying to get as far as I can just using my eraser. This way, when I start putting in the highlights with the white, they're going to end up looking really strong. So, this is going to sound a little bit weird and kind of like something out of Lord of the Rings. Reserve your powers of light and dark for when you really need them. Your powers of darkness and light. Looking closely, there's a reflection of the pear here in the bottle. This stuff is really fun to draw. It's not easy, but it's really engaging. More engaging than drawing boxes, I can tell you, which we haven't dealt with, and I don't know if we'll ever get to. There's wood grain here. Maybe I'll touch on it a little bit. All kinds of fun stuff going on here. And again, I'm not entirely done, but let's switch to the fireworks. Let's put in some bright highlights. And again, because I have slightly darker values in this case, these highlights hopefully, I hope, maybe, possibly, are going to look nice and bright. Oh yeah. Really bright. Glowing. Glassy. Okay, so I'm going to work on this a little more, take another photo, and then the reflective vase.